The Marty and Laura Show is brought to you by Veterinary Village. With locations throughout Wisconsin, Veterinary Village is dedicated to enhancing the quality of animal and human lives today and into the future. Welcome to the Marty and Laura Show. I am Laura.
And I'm Marty.
And today we've got kind of a hot button topic. This is a listener request, y'all. Talking about the bird flu. This has been kind of percolating and sort of bubbling, and I've kind of heard it back here. And then there was a cat that died, and I'm like, uh-oh, here we go. So, Marty, what do we got on the bird flu, man?
Well, at this point, it seems to be primarily cats. We
Mm.
haven't seen dog transmission that has been well established yet, but there has been cat transmission, and it's not only influencing house cats, our domestic cats that live in our homes or
Yes.
come and go, but out in Washington State, there were 20 big cats, one
Yes.
Bengal tiger hybrid, and 19 cougars
Yeah.
that have died from avian influenza H5N1, which is the HPAI, the highly pathogenic avian influenza. One of those HPIAs things. Yeah, it's bad.
It's been a full day for Marty at the vet clinic, and she missed her Packers game, and she's here talking to us. So I'm
And
saying,
I
y'all,
showed dogs this morning. I
cut
showed
her.
dogs this morning.
Oh,
I put a 5-point major on my 11-year-old dog this morning. So it's been a
okay.
day.
All right. I'm just saying, y'all, we're going to cut Marty just a tiny little bit of slack today. Pathogenic, pathologic, whatever.
It's bad.
It's bad. So yeah, I'm out here on the West Coast. I know about the big cats.
Yeah.
I think the house cat was Portland or Portland area. So let's talk about what it is, how animals can acquire it, and then can humans acquire it? Because I did hear actually that there was some human death in not too long ago from maybe a turkey farm. So talk to us. I would like to have more information than what I'm hearing on Facebook.
Yeah, and it's been a little hard to chase a lot of it down yet. There have
Mhm.
been employees at dairy farms
Mhm.
that have been exposed to the cattle that have it.
Mm.
There has been some cases about the dairy cattle milk, if it's fed raw to the cats, like the cats in the barn that come up to
Mhm.
the milking parlor, that there's been some cats that have picked it up from infected cows. So there's definitely reason for concern. At this point, there hasn't been any evidence of transmission from a sick cat to a person.
Okay.
There have been on poultry farms and there
Mhm.
have been on dairy farms, but most of our listeners are not probably working on dairy farms or poultry farms. But backyard chickens are a concern
Yeah. Yeah.
because people run out there and they kiss their chickens and
Right.
and
Everybody's
they
got a
love
chicken
their
coop.
chickens. Yeah, and they love their chickens, and I get that. Chickens are very fun. My very first pet when I was in grade school was a chicken, so I get it.
They're like dinosaurs. I don't get chickens, but I'm gonna just run with you on this. Um, so how does your backyard chicken or your cat or your hunting dog, because I believe it also affects wild birds. How
Yeah.
does this happen? What is our transmission? And then what are we gonna see if something's wrong?
So the transmission in these cats that have died, the house cats, appears to be raw turkey in a raw food diet, and so far it's been linked to two companies' diets. So far it's been Northwest Naturals and Monarch Pet Food.
Okay.
Those are the two we know about. There may be others. They have done voluntary recalls on those foods, and I don't know if we're going to see it in other parts of the country or not. Right now it's West Coast because those are where those pet food companies are.
Right.
But many of the pet food companies that are using raw poultry, and
Mhm.
that's going to include chicken, turkey, and duck,
Mhm.
can be at risk. So, and this is highly pathogenic. That means it's spread, it's a nasty bug, it's a virus, and so we have to really be concerned. And like I said, so far we haven't seen transmission from a sick cat to a person, and most of the dogs that have had this are asymptomatic because there have been some indications of dogs that may be carrying it, but they're asymptomatic. But if you're handling that cat or if you're handling the raw food diet, there's reason for concern there. So I think people need to pay attention to that. They need to be careful with their utensils in their kitchen, their cutting boards, their knives, their utensils, the cloth that you wipe off your sink with, those things.
Mm,
You need to wash your hands. You need to be really careful because you could pick it up from the poultry in the diet or from a pet. And especially for our customers and clients that may be immunocompromised.
mm,
And, that used to be a small number of people, used to be the very young and the elderly. But now we have many people that are on steroids, they're on
mhm,
immunosuppressive drugs for arthritis, for inflammatory bowel disease, for psoriatic arthritis, for this huge multitude of things. Many people that are on chemotherapy are going to be
mm,
immunocompromised. So we have to be really thoughtful about this particular situation. So I think people need to take a really hard look at
mhm,
what they're feeding if they're feeding their house cats this kind of a diet. Now, cats that go outside, if they're eating a dead bird, you can't control that. So you may have to keep your cat in the house. If you're immunocompromised, you should probably not be feeding a raw diet. You should probably not let your cats go out where there could be birds that they could pick up. So I think it's important that people know that. And if you absolutely, absolutely feel you must feed this kind of a diet, either your pet can't tolerate some other diet or you're really just passionate about it, you need to cook those diets.
mm.
And you can cook them yourselves. You can cook them to the temperature that's appropriate. And we'll put a link up into
Yep.
the post so that you know what temperature chicken, turkey, whatever should be.
Mm,
At this point, beef doesn't appear to be a source, pork doesn't appear to be a source, but it's sort of like during COVID in 2020, at the
mhm.
beginning of COVID, man, things were changing every week.
Right.
So I'm not going to say we definitively are not seeing it. I'm just going to say that it hasn't been reported that I've seen yet.
Okay. So this is a virus. So how is
Yes.
it transmitted within the avian, within the bird world? Does it impact our pet birds, right? Our house birds?
Mhm.
Or is it only wild birds? How does it go between them? And how will we know that they're affected? What are the symptoms?
Right. It's mostly been poultry,
Mhm,
but again, if you have pet chickens, that's poultry. Again, and I haven't seen it reported in any of the citizen birds, the birds that we live in our homes. There's been less in the migratory birds, like the geese and the ducks,
mhm,
but I have concerns about that because we live on the edge of the Horicon Marsh, the largest freshwater
mhm,
cattail inland marsh in the world.
mhm.
So like, we have sky carp
Yep.
all spring, all fall. We have sky carp. It's just they're in our fields. They come up on the sidewalks at our practices. They're all over the place. So again, there's really a lot of exposure in these situations. So you want to clean up the goose droppings, and you don't want to let your dog go out and eat them because that's what dogs do.
Mhm.
They're tasty little green logs that are laying on the sidewalk. So the dogs are like, "Whoa, look at me.
Oh, we
It's
have
awesome."
wild turkeys here,
Mhm.
and I assume you
Oh, yeah,
guys do.
we
They
do.
are all over the world.
Yep. Yep. And again, that's a possibility. So there's a lot of opportunities for these exposures to take place. So it's not just the raw meat diet, but it's the birds that are in our environment as well. So those are all things that we have to be really familiar with. Now, there's a really great blog post that I love. I love this
Mm,
veterinarian's blog post. He's from Canada, and it's called Worms and Germs. He addresses this. He's got a series of blog posts about this exact subject that
okay.
have evolved since around Thanksgiving when the first episode of this happened. He's
Mm,
been updating it regularly. So if you want to do something that is more readable,
mhm.
his material is absolutely digestible. It's really easy to read,
Okay.
really important information, and he's keeping it up to date. So worms and germs, because you may hear this after there's
Mm,
some additional changes. So I would encourage people to go to that. He, like I said, he's an infectious disease specialist that practices up in Canada. I'm doing a webinar next week with some Canadian people, and they're like, "Oh yeah, he's just down the road from me." I'm like, "Oh, that's cool. You like know this guy." So he's really quite skilled at communicating. So I think it's a really good source of information.
great. Okay. So how does do we know how it transmits between the birds themselves? How does a bird get bird flu?
Well, it's a respiratory disease, so it's going to spread through secretions. So, I mean, dogs will cough and bark at each other.
Mm-hmm.
Turkeys don't bark. So we can take that off the list. But shared water and food sources,
Mm-hmm.
any kind of respiratory secretions, if they, hack on each other and things, those kinds of things would be reason for concern. So it appears to be that kind of a source
Okay.
for how it's spread. And like, influenza in people, it's spread through coughing,
Mm-hmm.
sneezing, touching surfaces that people have touched their hands to.
Right.
And in dogs, because we do see canine influenza, there were two strains. Now we're down to one, strains of canine influenza. And it doesn't appear that the vaccine, I'm guessing that the vaccine that we have for dogs will not protect us against
Mm-hmm.
H5N1 because it's a different strain. And we don't have an influenza vaccine for cats. We have FVRCP, which is feline viral rhino tracheitis, calicivirus, herpes virus. There's chlamydia, there's bordetella in cats, but we
Mm-hmm.
don't have an influenza vaccine because we haven't seen influenza in the cat. So this is kind of novel and frankly, kind of scary.
Mm.
So they're not sure, like the big cats, the 19 cougars and the Bengal
Right.
tiger cross, they don't know if that was through infected birds or through an infected food source. That
Mm.
hasn't been made clear at this time. I'm sure they're investigating that.
Mm.
But any of those secretions can be a reason for exposure.
Okay, so I'm hearing no raw food for right now, at least, just
Right.
none. And you made reference to something a little bit earlier that I thought was really interesting. You said that I mean, we've seen it has killed a cat, it's killed the big cats. It has shown symptoms in dogs, or they were carriers. I don't understand what you were saying. Like you thought maybe this dog had it, but it wasn't sick. So
Well,
talk to me about that.
yeah, that's what Center for Disease Control is reporting, that dogs can be asymptomatic carriers. They haven't reported dogs sick with this at this
Mm,
point, but there have been asymptomatic carriers. And in the cats that they've reported, it's been respiratory disease and neurologic disease.
mm,
But, how many of our dogs come in to the veterinary clinic? Clients have boarded the dog. They've been out of town. They drop them off at the boarding kennel.
mm,
They go to doggy daycare once every
mm,
Thursday. And then the dogs come home with a cough or a
mm,
sneeze or respiratory congestion of some kind. And we say, oh, yeah, it's kennel cough. And we send you home with something to control the symptoms and maybe an antibiotic, maybe not, depending on the situation.
mhm,
And we don't typically swab these dogs. We don't have a rapid test like we do for COVID. Now, you can go to the drugstore and pick up a COVID test and you'll know in 20 minutes if you have COVID or not. But we don't have those kinds of rapid tests for dogs. So many times the dogs are not being tested for the kind of respiratory disease that they have.
mm,
Yes, there's influenza, but there's a rotavirus, there's a coronavirus, there's a bordetella, there's an influenza, there's a parainfluenza.
mhm,
Lepto can cause respiratory disease.
mm.
So there's this probably 20 organisms and probably organisms we don't even know about that can cause respiratory disease in the dog. So it doesn't mean that we don't have influenza, avian influenza in the dogs. It means at this point, nobody's nailed it down.
Got it. Got it.
So they
Okay.
very well could have it, and we just don't know about it. We last fall, October of 2023, we had a number of dogs that were on the West Coast for a big dog show. They came home, they all had respiratory disease. Turned out it was canine influenza,
Mhm,
but most of the clinics that saw these dogs weren't testing. We tested because they were dogs that had come back from the specialty. And we had heard the word that there were
mm,
a number of dogs that were
mm,
sick there, so we thought we
mhm.
really needed to define which organism it was, and it actually turned out to be a canine influenza.
Ah,
But most of the vets aren't going to swab the dog, spend the money. It's
mm,
$200, send it off to the diagnostic lab.
mm,
Takes 5 to 7 days to get a
mm,
result back, and
mm,
by then the dog's better or not.
or not.
It's sicker. And influenza, the first outbreak of that we saw in dogs was in 2004, and then there was another big outbreak in the 2015 era. So
Mm,
we've had two strains of influenza. One is we appear to have eradicated, but people need to be aware that these respiratory diseases, there's this big array of them. And
mhm.
when you go to the doctor with your garden variety, and before COVID, you
Yeah,
went to the doctor, you had the sniffles, you had a sore throat, they might check you for strep throat, but they weren't checking for every possible organism. It just wasn't a thing until COVID became a thing.
right.
Doggett simplifies the puppy buying journey by connecting families with the perfect breed and responsible, health-verified breeders. They are the only breeder marketplace that verifies health clearances and responsible breeding practices. Through their personalized puppy matcher tool and matchmaker services, they educate and guide buyers every step of the way, ensuring a seamless process and a perfect match for their lifestyle. From initial breed consultation to introductions with top breeders, Doggett makes responsible puppy ownership easy and stress-free.
And so we know that it can this particular viral infection, the avian flu, can transmit to people, right? We've seen it. We know it's happened. We know
Yes.
it caused a death, at least one. So if we are going to see this in our backyard chickens that we love to kiss on their little noses. Beaks, got it. Noses, beaks,
Nothing.
whatever. It's a little pokey thing. Not a chicken person, man.
I got that.
What are they gonna do? How are we gonna know they're sick? What is the symptom in a chicken?
Respiratory disease. So congestion. I mean, if a chicken coughs, it would be a cough. So yes, they would have respiratory disease, or you could just find them dead. Now, again, there's a million reasons that chickens die. It can be the raccoon came up and ravaged your chicken coop. It could be that they have mycoplasma. It could be one of a number of different organisms, again, that chickens get. So, if you have an outbreak of chickens at your house that are dying, you need to refrigerate them, at least one of them, get them to your veterinarian, get them submitted for diagnostics. It could be West Nile. I mean, there's this huge array of things that it could be. And because some of them are infectious to other birds or to you, you should get some diagnostics run. And there are definitely diagnostic labs that run checking that will check for these poultry diseases. In Wisconsin, they don't usually go to the Madison lab. They have a special lab in Barron, Wisconsin. So if you're really unable to figure out where to send your chickens if something happens, you can send them to Barron. And Barron, Wisconsin is in turkey country because Wisconsin raises a lot of turkeys for Thanksgiving dinner. So we have a diagnostic lab set up to primarily do poultry in Wisconsin. I am sure there are other state diagnostic labs that are similar. I'm just not as familiar with all the other 49 states because I don't practice there. But if your vet looks at you like, what? Chicken? I don't know what to do.
Chickens.
There are poultry classes veterinarians take, and there are poultry diagnostic labs. So if you are losing chickens, it doesn't cost any more to ship it to the Wisconsin lab than it costs to send it to your state diagnostic lab. And if you want to send it to somebody that actually does poultry, I would use the Barron, Wisconsin Veterinary Diagnostic Lab in Barron. But you want to ship it directly to Barron, not to Madison, because then they'll ship it to Barron and then you'll pay extra shipping and it takes extra time. And
longer.
If you want to know, you need to know. I mean, if you are losing chickens, one chicken is one thing, but if you are losing chickens, and I have clients with pretty good sized flocks, you need to know what's
good
going
friends
on. So
that raise like real live show chickens and show egg
with the fancy feathers and all the stuff.
Chickens. There you go, chickens. And we are encountering this as humans in a lack of eggs in the store and a higher price for eggs in the store, and it costs more to buy all the things because the chickens are having a problem with this, right? So I'm not entirely sure I've ever heard a chicken cough. Not sure I'd know what that sounded like if I did.
Yeah, you'd know.
Okay. So our takeaways: no raw feeding for a little while.
At least for a little while.
Keep an eye on your...
Maybe never again. I mean, most veterinarians are not fans of raw meat diets because there really isn't any scientific evidence that they're a healthier diet. So, and I was driving today on my way home tonight, and they were talking about someone who does this blog that they're encouraging people to ingest raw eggs. And I'm like, oh, my head just flew off. Like, this is a terrible idea. Please don't eat raw eggs yourselves.
No. Right. Okay. Here's the beautiful thing about civilization, it brought us fire.
Yes, that's what I've heard. We're the only animal that uses fire.
Yes. And consequently, our little bodies are adapted very nicely to things that are fired. In other
Yeah,
words, cooked.
cooked. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So if
And
you're not, you're not Rocky, you're not going to swallow a dozen raw eggs. This is not a good idea.
or raw oysters or raw Rocky Mountain oysters or any other kind of gross rawness. That's all I've got for you. Um, and I think it's also important to note, and we can put a link to this as well, but I've had several conversations on the other podcast talking on Pure Dog Talk, talking to scientists about and people who do this research about how dogs, specifically cats to a lesser degree, but dogs specifically have co-evolved with people, right? They do not have the internal combustion engine, for lack of a better way to say it, of a wolf. They have the dietary needs of a domesticated animal, which is quite different. Can you want to speak
Yes.
to that just for a second?
Yeah. I mean,
Because I
our
think it
dogs,
applies to the raw meat diet and why people
right.
are going to be hesitant to walk away from that because they believe in it. Here's some sciencey stuff that might give you some other thoughts on that process.
Right. Right. I was just doing some reading about this because I wrote some other material, and 16,000 years of coevolution have occurred with dogs and humans. And we didn't just one day go out there and move wolves into our communities. They co-evolved. So they were evolving, they were moving closer and closer to our human camps, and human camps were moving closer and closer to them. And they found a symbiotic relationship where we could help protect the dogs and the dogs could help protect us and help us hunt and
Mm,
do all the other
mm,
things.
mm,
And there's a wonderful book. Meg Olmert wrote a book called Made for Each Other. It's got two
mm,
pairs of human feet and then a dog between them. It's a really great book. It goes through oxytocin. It goes through coevolution. Again, if you're a reader or you like books on tapes or whatever,
mhm.
it's a really interesting book for those people who are interested in understanding the coevolution. Anyway, yes, dogs have co-evolved with us, and we have been feeding dogs off of our tables for
Mhm,
thousands of years.
mhm,
We don't even know. And initially they would get, scraps, the bones, the meat, the scraps of fat and all those things. And somewhere about 100 years ago, commercial dog food became a thing. And
mhm.
so it's not a very long period of time, but our dogs were eating cooked food along with us for a long time. Grandma used to scrape the plate off.
Mm.
Probably thousands of years ago, grandma was scraping the plate off, feeding the
Right,
dog.
right.
So I think people do need to think about that. And we just don't have strong evidence that there's science that says this is going to improve your dog's health. There are some individual dogs, I will say, that do better on a raw meat diet. But at this point, this is not the time to decide that a raw meat diet seems like a good idea. If you want to eat raw carrots, hey, those are okay. But really think carefully about how you're feeding your dog. And there's high pressure pasteurized food, there's gently cooked food, there's all these things,
Mhm.
but you really need to think about it. So kibble and canned dog food are going to be the safest source of
Right.
food at this point until it's all sorted out. And it may be several years before
Mm.
we get this
This
figured out.
has been percolating. Like I've been hearing
Yeah.
bird flu for a couple of years. So it's just starting
Yes.
to just build in intensity, and whether it's going to peter
Yes.
out or go further is another thing we don't know the answer to.
Right. I just really hope it doesn't end up in the migratory birds because, oh boy, that's going to mean the entire country, the entire world is affected by
Right.
this really potentially dangerous disease. So we don't need to add any additional risk to pet ownership or to our pet's health. We just need to make everybody safe.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Okay. Anything else on bird flu that I don't know? What is it? Do you know what it does to people? I assume respiratory as well. I
Respiratory
haven't been
headaches.
able to
Yeah.
find anything about that.
Yeah, Center for Disease Control has some good information if anybody's looking, and trying to keep up with things. CDC is going to always be
Yeah.
a good source. There's some sources you can trust better than others. Mayo, Cleveland Clinic. There's some really good sources out there, but Facebook is not your best scientific source of information. So let's stick to the
That's why we exist. We are not Dr. Google and we are not Facebook.
No.
So that's why I wanted to, answer the listeners' request very specifically, asking about raw food diets and the bird flu with the knowledge about some of these other things that have happened. So that's why we had the conversation today. A little bit shorter than usual conversation, but really important information, very timely information, and we're really glad you guys could join us for it. So
absolutely.
Thank you,
Marty.
Thank you for joining us on the Marty and Laura Show. We're excited to bring you these unique, fun, fact-based conversations about pet health. We hope you'll join us on social. Stop by the website to sign up for an extra tip of the week for your pet. While you're at it, do us a favor, please, and leave a review wherever you find your podcasts. The Marty and Laura Show is produced by Pure Dog Talk, Inc., sound design and editing by Premium Audio Services.